Work with this computer. Hey everyone. I have a guest on our podcast today who is no stranger to our podcast, which is Sarah Harmon. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Emily and I decided that, we wanted to go this route of recording some how-to podcasts. And one of the things we posted, this as a question on Instagram, and one of the first responses that we got was how to stop second guessing all the decisions that you make as a parent. Although really what we'll talk about will apply to all things in life, but I thought that was such a good response.
So good.
And I was like, even though I feel like Emily and I could probably answer this, I feel like there's so much value add that you have to this conversation. So just like to have you here.
I'm trying to decide whether you say that because I'm a therapist or because I'm one of the most indecisive people.
Maybe a little bit of both.
And I have really worked on this part of myself since you've known me over the past 7 years.
And I'm also an incredibly decisive person. I mean, you and Emily could not have done this podcast together because you two are not quick to make decisions.
We wouldn't have been able to decide on the topic.
That's so good, actually. That's like so true. So true. You would have had like a 40-minute discussion before recording the podcast on what to record on the podcast and still been like, so we have two options. Like, what do you think we should do? And you'd be like, I don't know. What do you think we should do? What do you think we should do?
We would have put it out to vote. So other people could have decided.
I would have decided for you. Yep. Or I would have been sitting in the office been like, make a choice. I can't say that served me well as a parent when I give my kids choices and they don't choose, but hey, to each their own. Anywho, for those of you who may not know Sarah, which would be slightly impossible at this point if you're a regular listener to our podcast, Sarah, you just mentioned you're a licensed mental health counselor, mindfulness instructor. Sarah owns two companies, the Parent Wellness Group, which really focuses on individual and couples therapy for parents. And then the School of Mom, which is the MOM stands for Mothering Oneself Mindfully. So really looking at like yourself as a mother, your mothering model, and trying to bring more mindfulness into your everyday parenting life to show up as the parent that you want to be for your kids and may or may not have had for yourself. So yeah, just like this is why we have you here, because it's this everyday parenting stuff that I think is really where your superpower lies, Sarah. With the whole evidence-based take that you have on things and just the relatable aspect to it of also being a parent to two young kids too. So thanks for being here.
Oh my gosh, I always love coming on and chatting. And I think what's so fun about this conversation is from the evidence-based is really like living it. This is, and you and I are going to talk about this in our chat around how this played out, the specific aspects of our decision-making process and not questioning decisions, how this has played out in our relationship and how we've supported each other in this. Totally. So I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, let's dive in because unlike how this would have gone if it was you and Emily, you and I just hopped on the phone and came up with, what do you call four things? We're going to touch on 4 key things in this how-to.
I think we have 6, so we got to move quickly.
Okay, I think I'm thinking of maybe step 3 that has 4 elements to it or something. But all right, great. So we have a 6-step system here to how to stop second guessing all of your decisions. Why don't we start with the first thing, which I feel like you and I are totally aligned on, which is just around like actually just quickly having this line of questioning, no judgment around what's underneath the questioning of that decisions and whether or not this is a new behavior for you. If you've always been like this, does it serve you a purpose? Does it not? So we'll love to sort of turn it over to you, Sarah, for step 1.
Yeah. So I think if you're struggling with making a decision right now, I think a great reflection to start with is this me? So Jamie and I are joking, but it's so true. Like, is this me? If I asked myself, like, when I became a parent, was I starting to second guess and really be overwhelmed with decision making? Sure was. And that's me, right? So I'm the type of person that would like be happy to put out an Instagram poll around what to wear every morning or what to eat or what to buy or whatever it is. Like that is me. And not as much anymore, because this has really been a part of me that I've been working on, because I want to be able to trust my intuition and my judgment. And Jamie, you've witnessed this in me, I think,
Yeah.
over the past few years. Parenting has been a big push for me. So when I ask that question of myself, is this me? Yes, it is. I am actually someone who does tend to second guess myself. And when you come into parenting, there are so many more opportunities
Yeah.
to second guess yourself, because everything's new, right? I was sharing this like analogy with a client earlier around like you wouldn't know how to fix something under the hood of your car if it was broken, and you wouldn't work, like you wouldn't judge yourself about that because you have
Right.
no background in cars. And yet
Right.
you're like, why can't I figure out why my baby is crying? Well, you don't have a background in babies. Like you don't know, and especially this baby, and especially if it's your first. And so,
Yeah.
so that's me. But so what about you though? You're the opposite.
I am the opposite. So like I wasn't used to, so I am not somebody who questions my decisions. I think we'll get to like why in a little bit, which I think it really is around like I really do trust my instinct. So we'll get to that piece of it. But I'm not somebody who typically questions decisions. I'm usually somebody to like see my choices and like make a choice and feel good about it and not really go back on it. The times in my life where I can like specifically remember like really specific examples about my life where I made a choice and was not happy with it, and it was because I didn't like I knew when I made the choice that I was actually going against like this instinctual thing. And I have 3 examples in my head right now. But like those are the things that I remember where like I went against my instinct. So when I became a parent, especially with my first, I did second guess everything. I actually did a lot with Mackenzie too, my second. And this was new for me to do that. And it like it really drove me insane. Like it was new. I did not like it. It was not something that was serving me well. Yeah, that was new for me, and it made me it made me like angry and annoyed and frustrated with myself. On top of obviously like being sleep deprived and having to keep human beings alive. But yeah, that was new for me, and I struggle with that big time.
Yeah. I think I see that. I actually really felt that as I became a mom. I remember a specific incident as well where I like didn't advocate for, I don't know, like it was a stranger touching Libby or something like that. And I felt this very strong, decisive, assertive mama bear energy come out of me that I'd never felt before. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my goodness, normally I'm pretty easy and I go with the flow. And this, like, so I think it's interesting how it can really be highlighted when
Yeah.
you become a mom.
Yeah. And I love your analogy about you have like no training in this. Like when you were saying that, I was thinking about like starting a new job, right? Like, I mean, again, maybe depending on your personality, but like when you start a new job, there's always this like learning period, right? Where like you're giving yourself a little bit more grace. Like you're understanding that you need to learn the ropes. Like I did, I worked in a bunch of different hospitals. I did this in hospitals that I worked in. But we don't give ourselves I don't think most parents give ourselves the same kind of grace. Like we think that all of this is supposed to come naturally and we're supposed to know what to do, and there really isn't second guessing. But like we don't have any experience in it, real life experience in it. Maybe we got some education in it, maybe not. So yeah, I think that like thinking about it in a sense of like not only is it starting a new job that you have no background in. Let me just clean up that analogy. It's not like when I was working in the hospitals, I had some experience in it. It's like starting a new job that you have no experience in.
Yeah. Well, and there's the second factor of that for the going to the car analogy is like,
Yeah.
I don't work in cars, so this is laughable. Like, it's like, okay, well, the carburetor fits here or the plug goes here. It's very cut and dry. So with kids, it's like you have no experience. And as we will talk about, there is no right decision often. It's not so simple as A plus B equals C, which is
Right.
part of the driver in indecision and questioning your decision.
Yeah. Love that. All right.
Driver, no pun intended.
You're really hammering
You've caught
this
us at the end of the
analysis
day,
metaphorical.
folks. So get ready for some cheesy puns.
Oh, so good. Okay.
Okay.
So we're
number
asking,
2.
is this me? Okay.
Yeah.
Decide
So
whether or not it's you.
so number 1 is this me, and really understanding yourself and just naming that. I think seeing clearly, okay, wait a second. Wow, like I am really stuck in indecision, and it's almost overwhelming, it's paralyzing, and that is new to me, and that makes sense because I'm in this new job with this, being in front of me who doesn't have a manual. I didn't get a manual download at the hospital when I delivered. So so the second piece is, I like to think of this as, I have a quiz that you can check out, schoolmom.com/quiz, where you can get to know the parts of yourself and figure out which one might be the dominant voice. So I have 4 parts of me: that my anxious voice, my worrier, I have my critic, her name is Beth, I have Polly the planner, and I have Nancy the negative one. Now, when you're deciding on something, you need to figure out who's behind or who's weighing in on the decision, right? So if I let, for example, Gina, who's my anxious worrier, always decide, she's going to decide from an anxious place. Who will be making the decision is fear and anxiety, right? If I let Beth take the reins, who's going to be deciding is like my judgment, maybe bitterness and frustration. So
can I stop you for 1 second, Sarah?
Yeah.
When we're thinking about these different personalities, is there also an external element to this too, right? So you're saying that we have these like internal voices, right? Around fear and anxiety, judgment, planning, and maybe the planner takes a little bit away from that intuition piece, right? The logic one. But isn't there also an external piece to this? Like, you're saying, the internal piece of like judgment, but maybe there's also like external judgment that is amplifying the voice of the internal judgment that you already have, right? So if you have a judgy family member who is making you feel bad about sleep training, then does that make your internal voice of judgment louder because it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that, right? And so there's that is there an external piece to it too?
1,000%. This was actually in tip 4, Jamie. So this,
sorry, I forgot the order.
But this is, maybe we should bump it up to number 3 because it's who's weighing in is kind of similar. So there's who's weighing in internally and who's weighing in externally. And I laugh with clients all the time about opinions, and I'm sure you do too, that come at you like, I can't believe this like 75-year-old man at the coffee shop is actually talking to me about my boobs. Like he's talking about my breastfeeding. Like what? Right. Like who gave him the right to do that? And definitely family on all things that involve really important decisions in your parenting. So everyone's weighing in all the time. So 2 sides of this, right? So with the internal one, you really want to like the reason you're making the decision. I don't think people really want anxiety to be making the decision unless there's a true crisis at hand where anxiety would be helpful, where like it's saying, oh my gosh, there's a massive risk here. And I think, this is where like people that struggle with anxiety in COVID, anxiety was really helpful. Like anxiety shined for people in COVID. It was like, yes, this is my time. Like I am going to drive this decision and I'm going to save your life because of it. Right. But normally, we don't like anxiety driving the decision. So really trying to discern who's weighing in internally. So that's number 1. Like the person that's going to answer. You want it to be the more confident and intuitive, maybe future version of you that's like, this is where we want to end up. And you're going to touch on this specifically. We're going to go into a scenario. But around the who's weighing in is, I always say, we talk about pro team. Who is on your consult team? And get very clear on that. I mean, we joke in my house, and my kids are 4 and 6 now, so we don't have as many needs of naps, like all the desperate questions all day long of like, what do I do here? What do I do here? What do I do here? But my husband would always be like, just ask Emily and Jamie. What do we do? Like literally my whole parenting journey was like whatever Emily and Jamie coached me to do. And you gave us options, but like you guys were my pro team. Like and this is like, you guys trumped people in my life that I love and that have, are amazing parents, but it was always to you. So I think that's really
Right.
important, is who's weighing in and who are you going to allow
Right.
to influence or guide you in your decision process. And
Right.
for me, it was like you guys every time.
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked about this before, like, we talk about this in boot camp too, or in our MSGs, as like, establishing, even during pregnancy, like, hopefully people who are pregnant are listening to this too, because there's decisions that you're already making, right? And early on in your pregnancy, you're making decisions, right? But setting up your people, right? So who are your people? And you've already started to give a few examples, but same for me, Sarah. Like, my people were Emily, because that would be fucked up if she wasn't, I guess. My two sisters. I had two friends one friend who had kids that were older than mine, one friend who was like in it with me, pregnant at the same time, had kids at the same time. And then Eleanor, pediatric nurse practitioner. And I think there's an element to realizing that, like, maybe some people who you spend a lot of time with and maybe you admire in other ways, like, might not be on your team, like other family members or specific friends or whatever the case may be.
Totally. And I think this is, we have a mutual love of Emily Oster. I think she's a big part of this because she's a curator of data and information that helps people also, like, access what maybe a pro team person might say. Right. Or not even, like, sometimes pro teams are still like very opinionated. And so I think, that's another resource for people to weigh out the options to make the best decision for their family.
Right. Totally. Okay. Love that. So we're gonna now, what was 3, we're gonna make 4.
Yeah, they were out of order, actually. I think that was the right. That was right. So number 4 is, let's just talk about decision-making tips. And this has been something I've definitely dove into my own research, I've gotten coached on this. I've really evolved my own process in making decisions, not just from a parent perspective, but also from a business perspective, right? So I'm going to shortcut these because, this could be a little bit longer, but I think we both agree that one of the best decision-making tips is to lay out all the options, literally put everything on the table, because sometimes the right decision is the one that, like, we don't put out because we don't even think it's possible. Right. So consider everything really from, like, what you would think is worst case, and then maybe what we think is best case. But also then look at your options and ask yourself, what if all of these routes turned out really well? Like, what if there was no wrong way? And which decision would you go with if there was no wrong way? And so maybe let's use an example with this one, because I think now we can really make this more practical for people listening.
Yeah. Can I insert a metaphor, which you've heard me use before? So if you've done a call with me around making a decision, I almost always use this metaphor, which is like, it's like trying, like, when you're trying to make a decision, think about it as having a rack of clothes to try on outfits. And so, like, you're in a dressing room and you have this rack of clothes, and the rack of clothes are all your choices. And what you're going to do is, like, think about a choice. So we're talking through, like, best case scenario, worst case scenario. I always tell people, if you're considering the worst case scenario, you have to give equal time, if not more, to the best case scenario too, right? And when you're considering the path of making this choice, you're gonna try that outfit on. And, like, that's like you thinking about, like, what that choice would look like, would feel like. There's this bodily element that we'll get into. And just like if you looked at an outfit in the mirror and you didn't like the way that it looked, you put it back on the rack, you try the next thing on, right? And then we'll get to this stage in a second. But then there is also, like, you can try it on, and maybe you do actually, like, think that you like it in the dressing room, and then you bring it home and you realize you don't, and you return it. So I in thinking about that, this is where I think the pro team really comes into play too, because sometimes your options, right, your choices on the rack, you didn't even know some of those options. Like, I coach people a lot, and we'll use a different example, but I coach people a lot around this when they're trying to decide how to feed their baby, right? Like, oftentimes people think that their choices are, like, breastfeeding or formula feeding, but there's a lot of other choices in between, right? There's combo feeding, there's exclusively pumping, right? So So anyway, that's the metaphor that I typically use. I mean, I think you take it like even further sometimes, Sarah, this metaphor. But yeah, if we're going to think about this in terms of like laying out all the choices and a specific example, should we use the pacifier example? Is that the one you want to go with?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just also laughing with the clothing analogy because I love that metaphor. I use it like really try it on for 24 hours. Like make the decision in your head and your body, try it on. But I'm laughing like back to where Emily and I would be. Is like I would come out and be like, Jamie, should I buy this? Like, do you like this? Like I mean like the metaphor is like kind of working for me, but like if I think about my buying process, I've literally taken pictures of myself in the dressing room and probably sent them to me.
I've
So
literally never done that in my entire life.
I'm gonna continue working on that. I can't wait to hear from people listening. Like we should have a poll of like which type of person are you? Like ask all the friends to affirm the decision or just do it yourself.
And yeah, maybe it's like you thought you were the person who's decisive, and then you're like, fuck, I'm the person in the dressing room who's sending the pictures to 40 different people to confirm whether or not I buy it.
Exactly. I have a dear friend from college who went up to I watched her go up to a store clerk and she just said to her, do you think I'm gonna like this? And seeing the view on the woman was like, and I totally got it because I feel like I would ask the same question. And she was like, I don't know. I think you might, right? So it's just so interesting how we go through this process as individuals.
But I think this is a good segue into what we're about to talk about in terms of like each choice being a good one, right?
Yes.
Because like even if you are the person who sends the picture, that's not necessarily a bad choice. Like that might actually be a good choice for you, for somebody who is struggling with a decision, and so long as you're sending that picture to somebody on your pro team.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So two incidents literally that you and I have been through. One was the pacifier. I called Jamie because so to set the scene, my oldest was dropping her pacifier and my youngest, I was like, do I drop them at the same time? Like, do I drop any of them? And then of course we could talk about weaning as well. I think you coached me on that as well.
Yeah, weaning's a good one. Whichever direction you want to go here. You want to do the pacifier?
Yes. Yeah. So let's talk about the pacifier. So I called Jamie up and, this is years ago. I'm like, okay, so, and at the time, of course, this decision felt like, am I giving away my child or not? Like it was so big because as you know, if the pacifier is really working for your kid, your family, like it feels like you're completely going to ruin your life and you're one ticket to quiet. Right.
Yep.
And so, so what did you say to me?
Yeah. So again, like thinking about best case scenario, worst case scenario, right? Best case scenario is you drop the pacifier, takes a couple nights, like it does with most people. And then you've made this transition and you no longer like have to worry about the pacifier as a crutch, right? So like that's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is there's a few different scenarios, I guess. Like in dropping the pacifier, the worst case scenario is you drop the pacifier, 3 or 4 days or nights later, it's not any better. It actually feels like it's worse, right? And then like what are your actions there? Do you continue down the path? Do you give the pacifier back, right? Then there's the option to just keep using the pacifier, right? And like what are the implications of that, right? Like why right now are you trying to get rid of the pacifier? I think the example with Libby was like she was like throwing it out of the crib, wasn't she?
Yeah, and I think also like part of it was like, are we dropping them both at the same time too? Like it was like there was like a double layered decision. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there was yes, I do remember. There's like this extreme decision to like, well, if I'm going to do one, then I have to do both. Yeah. Because then the baby has one, but my older daughter doesn't. And it was like, you can do that. That's also a choice. If you do that, this is what I would expect, right? You can also not do that. You can continue to give the pacifier to the baby and not to Libby. Right. So like already here, what have I laid out? 5 or 6 different scenarios.
Yes, so you've laid them out, and you've also just like as you're speaking, I'm realizing that what you really did for me in that moment was you got me out of my anxious narrative. Because before I talked to you, all I could think of was like, worst case scenario, what is this going to do? It's not going to go well. Like, what if we never sleep again? Right? Like that's the narrative my anxiety has. So as I consulted Jamie as my protein person, you lay it out in a very logical level, and I can see those options as all good.
Right. And even saying like I'm usually when I give people these options, right? I'm saying it like I'm going to like matter of factly tell you what they all are, very similar to what I just did, and then say which one feels like a good option, right? Because this is going to tap into a little bit of like the intuition piece, but like which one does feel like a good option for you? Which one feels doable? Which one do you feel like you could choose to do right now? Right. And for some people, it's going to say like, for some people, it's me giving you permission to not change anything at all, which is an option. And one that I have never have any judgment around and will happily validate you to do that. And then there are other people who will choose any of the 4 or 5 options that I just laid out. And then just talking through what that actually looks like, what that means, how to know, how to know how much time to let go by before you decide whether or not it was the choice that you want to stick with. I really don't want to say right or wrong here, right? Like if it's the choice that you want to stick with, or if you want to return the outfit and try on a new one, right?
Right. So we can, let's skip to 6 on that one. So that is
to recap these 6 points in order.
So that is really setting a deadline to make it. Yeah. Right. Give yourself a deadline to make it. Okay. At the end of this conversation, or Jamie, I'm going to think about this and I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to commit to a boundaried amount of time. Right. This is sleep training 101 that I've learned from you all, right? Is that there is no point to make that commitment if you're not going to stick with it for, what's your suggestion? Like a week, like 7 days, or?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. So this is a great point. Like, I also think the boundary set, the boundary that you set around the commitment to it needs to make sense for the action that you're doing, right? So we all know every transition that you have with kids, you need to give it a set amount of time, but depending on what it is, it's a different amount of time. So something like the pacifier, I would say after 4 or 5 days or nights, if things aren't significantly better, or if they're getting worse, or if they're exactly the same, that's probably when I would reevaluate it. Versus like transitioning to a daycare, I tell people 4 weeks. Like you have to give it 4 weeks to decide whether or not, you want to reevaluate that decision. So it just depends. Sleep training, 5 to 7 nights.
I love that you just put that out there, because you said we all know, and I was like, I don't think I did know that. But that's
sorry,
really
I meant we all know that every transition that you make with kids takes time. Not that there's a set amount of time.
Well, right. But what a great point, right? Because you're right. Like every single one is going to be different. It might be one day. It might be 4 weeks. That's so interesting. So setting your deadline and then consult with your pro team to understand in general, what is an appropriate boundaried amount of time that you need to commit to actually see the results of your effort. It's kind of like, when we talk about taking meds, like, in the mental health field, so you do need to stay on them for a little while to see an impact. Meditation, like anything that actually has like an outcome, we do need to sometimes have a dedicated commitment time. So I think that's really important. But then of course, as you said, it's okay to change your mind, but you do want to give yourself that stick to the boundary, because then you're just doing yourself a disservice, and it's really not fair to your kid either if your kid's involved, because you're not giving them the opportunity to adjust.
Right. I mean, I think this is where like my second guessing is, going back to what I said in the beginning, was like really a hindrance to my parenting, because when I was second guessing, I was changing my mind constantly. And so I'm talking about like sometimes within 24 hours, I was trying 4 or 5 different things. And you can't change everything all at once and then decide that nothing's working, right? And not give one thing any amount of time to transition to work, and then you decide that nothing's working. And I actually do think, though, now that we're talking, getting into this, I actually think that's where most parents lie, or a lot of parents lie when they're struggling with a transition or a situation, which is like, I've tried everything and nothing works, right? And it's like, and typically what I say, hear this a lot, typically my response is, have you tried one thing consistently? Mm-hmm. And like, that's where this decision-making model, I really think, comes into play.
I think that's such a great point. Yeah. I mean, I again distinctly remember on sleep training, I don't know if it was you or Emily, or actually probably both of you, having very firm conversations, firm but loving conversations with me and my husband, saying, you guys have to sign a contract and neither one of you will go in, because you make the decision to sleep train, and at 2 a.m., who's weighing in my mind? Gina, Polly, Beth, and Nancy. Everybody has an opinion about how this was the worst decision ever. I'm ruining my kid. I'm an awful mom. How dare you? This is terrible. Like, blah, blah, blah. And I have to ground myself in the commitment and the more rational, healthy logic conversation that I had, which is why I think actually having a contract, we kind of jokingly did one, but it was really helpful because that piece of paper was a grounding force for us when, at 3 a.m. when you wanted to backtrack.
But that's like any decision that you make in parenting, right? Like when you're in it, when you've made the choice, and now you're living in the choice that you made, right? And maybe it's going well, maybe it's not. And usually obviously the scenario is when you start second guesses when it's not going well. Like you forget about your like former, more rational self who was like having this conversation with their protein. That isn't the voice that gets turned up when you're in that moment. The voice that gets turned up is whatever those insecurities are. So yeah, I think that you mentioned this a little while ago, which was like around this, there's your former self who helped you make this decision, and then there's your future self who, like, what would your future self say looking back on this, right? Which is probably when you wake up in the morning, using your example of the sleep training, you wake up in the morning and you went in, like usually the feeling is like, fuck, like I shouldn't have gone in. I knew I shouldn't have gone in. Why did I go in? Right. So anyway, I think there's that the bookends of your former self making this rational decision and your future self looking back on it and like your former self was right. But then there's this, how do you manage it while you're in it piece?
Totally. And I think this is where veteran parents really get this, because you are that future version with your second or third kid, right? Because you know that it does end. You know that the pacifier, they'll adjust and your life won't be ruined. You know that they'll eventually start sleeping. You know they'll eventually start pooping on the potty. Like, but in that, new parent brain, it's really hard because your anxiety becomes in the moment the rational voice, right? You think it's the one that like you're basically arguing with your anxiety, and it will win at 3 a.m.
Always. It'll always win at 3 a.m.
It'll always win. Okay, so that was number 5, right? So set a deadline, make it, and commit it. We'll review all of these in some order. I'm not sure if it'll be the ones we cover. But the last one then is this is so relevant to me because especially like in business, where you get coached, and in parenting you get coached and you're like, yes, okay, this is good, and then you walk away from that conversation and you try it on. Truly, you either try it on like just as an experiment, or you actually make the decision, and pretty quickly your body has a reaction. And so the last step is really important, especially for women, because I found personally and professionally that there's not a lot of women out there who have a relationship with their body that is trusting. We're often, in our society, of course, is not very good at teaching women and encouraging women to trust their bodies. We won't go down that rabbit hole right now, but let's just say that's very clear. And so learning how to trust your body with decision-making is absolute gold. And so what I would say is if you're like, what does that mean? A couple things. So one I would say is, people talk about the gut reaction, right? That real like gut yes or gut no. It's not always that way. So what I've learned is there's a few different ways that people can make decisions, and you might have one that's more prominent than the other. So one is the gut, which is like a hell yes or a hell no. It's like really instant. And like if Jamie was like, said to me, like, you got to get rid of the pacifier. I'm like, absolutely not. Like, like maybe that's like I just know. The second is emotional. So your emotions might be helping you make a decision. So getting curious about that. So if you feel like super sad about it or super irritable about it. Now, I think this is, a little complex. I encourage you to speak with a therapist about your emotions with this, because it might be, that they're trying to come in and take over the decision. But sometimes that emotional response really is a nice sign from the body that you should listen and maybe take it into account. And then the last one would be like a quiet underknowing. Like it's not like a instant gut yes, and there's no huge emotion, but you just know on some level it can't be explained, that you know what the quote unquote right answer is for you in this moment. And so I love playing right now with asking my body. So even like one way to experiment with this is to, get quiet and tune into your body and ask your body, like, what in my life was a confident yes? So was it like, deciding to marry your partner? Was it deciding to buy that shirt? Was it taking that job, or finding something that you had no question about? Hopefully there's one you can think about. And as you relive it in your memory, feel in your body what the yes is like. How does it show up? And usually a yes is more like expansive. It feels kind of good, feels like a opening, a warmth.
Yeah.
And then ask yourself, what was a no? What was a hard no in your life that you knew was a no? And you've already gone through it and it's very clear. And then see how your body responds. And that usually is a tightness, a constriction, a closing of the heart, the throat. And so see the contrast in your body with the history of your decision making. And then you can use those sensations to play with future decisions, right? So you might say, like, okay, trying this on for size, like, how does this feel in my body? And what's really interesting is sometimes your body will totally catch you off guard. Like this has been blowing me away more and more, of like, when I just ask my body, I get a pretty clear response.
Yeah.
And the tricky piece is sometimes it goes against the logic, or it goes against the protein.
Right.
And you do just have to weigh that out, right? You have to weigh that out, because and this is a matter of trust. It doesn't mean that you don't trust your body if you don't go with that decision. You might, and you like, oh, I trust my protein more, but it just says, I trust Jamie enough in this, given her background, and she has kids that are older than me, and she's done this so many times. Even though this kind of does feel like a no, I actually like what feels like a yes is trusting Jamie. Right. So I'm going to go with that. Who wants to make the decision is the future version of me that wants to have a kid, that doesn't need a pacifier. And also the part that like isn't afraid of, the consequences if I don't go that route. So I think that last piece is truly asking your body and see if it's on the same page, and allow your body to be part of the conversation.
There are two things that came up when listening to you speak, and hopefully this is relevant. First of all, in thinking about scenarios that were an easy yes versus like a hard no, for me, the feeling in my body for the yeses was like a lightning, like almost like a weight lifted off my shoulders, felt like I could take a deep breath. For the no's, it was like, what came up for me was like a pushing away, like almost like I wanted to like push something away and like run kind of thing. That's just how I responded to that. But I was also thinking about like, what is the response in your body? I think sometimes when you're in certain scenarios where people do say something to you. So when you were talking, I was thinking about like sitting in a room with a pediatrician, right? Or whatever, another healthcare provider, let's say. Doesn't matter who. And like you said something, what you said, Sarah, was like, Jamie, you told me you have to drop the pacifier, right? And so whoever this is in your life, maybe it's a healthcare provider, maybe it's a family member, but when somebody says that to you, I also think it's important to acknowledge like how your body reacts to those people too. Because I think that's really indicative of like the relationships in your life and the people that you're seeking out, maybe for your protein, maybe just who you're surrounding yourself with, of what type of people you do want to be surrounded by and supported by, and what people don't. Because I feel like one of the things that, and obviously you know this, Sarah, you've known us for so long, like one of the things that Emily and I really have tried to create in this space of naps and nurture and all of it is really actually not being the person who's saying you have to do that. Because I know that my response to you would be like, no, I fucking don't. Even if I wanted to do it before, if somebody says it to me like that, I mean, that's my own personality. But right, like it really is about, like, we're talking about a scenario, which is parenting, that is not black and white. There is so much gray. And so I do feel like whenever somebody is telling you, like, you absolutely cannot do that, I think that is a reason to, like, see how that lands in your body and question whether or not that's the right person that you want to seek out for support, or to maybe like educate and even provide you with care sometimes, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because, what the body wants to feel safe. And when
Right.
someone is coming at you with a very forceful opinion,
Right.
it comes back to that trust piece. It's
Right.
saying, like, you can't trust yourself in this decision.
Right.
You need to trust me. And that is really aggressive for the body not to be able to trust itself. And so one thing that came up as you're speaking, though, is as you get to know and you tune into your body, the tricky piece is that a no can also be a close a similar feeling to anxiety, right? Anxiety can be that constriction, and so you want to just start to get to know yourself with that. That's why I really say, like, go back and feel what a no feels like. And then also maybe start to observe what your anxiety feels like, because they're nuanced in your body. And if anxiety is present, that's a little bit different. So say you're sharing something with me.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, contraction and constriction, I think that's a no. Actually, what it is just my anxiety of like what that might look like, what that decision might look like.
Yes.
So, but I think you're absolutely right, is that you to provide a space that feels safe for me to hold all of that in my body, right? So I can observe my anxiety, I can observe my yeses and nos without feeling like you're going to completely overhaul and steamroll my decision, because then I go into a stress response. So you create the space for a collaborative conversation that helps me explore trusting my body. And that is gold, right?
Yeah.
And that is gold. That helps me feel safe because it feels like I have bumpers for myself.
Totally.
Yeah. So I think that's so, you guys do this so beautifully.
I mean,
and
so do you, in fairness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, specifically though, all these parenting decisions, like time and time again, you have provided those bumpers and that firm, grounded feedback and collaborative discussion that allows me, as I said, to explore my own decision making, but really allows me to trust my pro team. So maybe we regroup on the
should we
6.
recap the 6?
Let's recap. So the first one is, so you're struggling with making decisions. The first one is this you? Like, is this you getting some awareness around, okay, maybe let's just name the fact that in this stage, whether it's pregnancy or newborn land or parenting, that has really heightened this. And that's a product of just the position I'm in. The second is what's behind the decision internally. So is it fear, judgment, anxiety, anger, disappointment? And then, of course, externally, who's weighing in? So getting very clear on your pro team, your pediatrician, your dear friend, your sister, your whatever it is. And definitely, of course, naps. I'm so biased. And then moving to decision-making tips. So putting all the options on the table. What if all the routes turned out great? What is your future self? What would your future self say? Like, what is the older parent version of you? And if you are a new parent, that's why we ask older parents, and they can remind you that, like, your kid will eventually sleep. Your kid will eventually, get out of diapers. Your kid will eventually not have a pacifier. Setting a deadline to make a decision and then commit to a boundaried amount of time to allow that decision to actually play out one way or the other. But of course, full permission to change your mind within that, within or at the end of that boundary. And then, one thing I forgot to mention in that is so interesting. There's a study that I'm still hunting for that in 2 groups of people, one where they made a decision and that was it. They were not allowed to go back on their decision. And the other group made a decision, but they were allowed to change their mind. They found that the people that were not allowed to change their mind actually were more content in their decisions. So just that real interesting mental component of deciding and committing and getting on board with your decision, which I think is another thing you guys do so well, that allows you to just get out of indecisiveness. So if you actually say to yourself, there's no other option here for me, like I am getting rid of the past part and I'm not going to go back, that could give you a little extra nudge in embracing and actually then embodying your decision, which is really helpful with your kid, right? Like going
this is why I think like the boundary, even for the people who are going to reevaluate it, like this is why the boundary timeline is so important, right? Because at the very least, you're committing to making this decision and sticking with it for a intentionally allotted amount of time, right? But yeah, like and maybe that is part of this process of feeling it in your body of like, what if I said you have no other choice but to choose this path, and this is the only path, and you're not going to change your mind? I think that's also helpful in that the last piece here of embodying, what does it feel like in your body?
Yes, totally. Yeah. And so then that's where we come to the last part, is like, ask your body, is it on the same page? And really trusting that your body has so much wisdom, even if you've never done this before. And so really getting to know what feels like a yes, what feels like a no, what feels like anxiety for me. And that's all stuff. It takes time, but it's really valuable exploration.
Yeah. Oh, awesome, Sarah. This is so good. We should make this a workshop. But in the meantime, I would like, just as a fun thing, I would actually love to hear where people are at on this decision making, second guessing yourself scale of, are you a Sarah? Are you a Jamie?
And I will say lastly, like, so for me, as someone who's been working on this, you came into my community and did a workshop on being assertive. And I will say, like, I channel Jamie sometimes in making a decision, so I know how good she is at it. So sometimes I'll like literally like think about, okay, like I'm gonna like bring Jamie, almost like, a ghost, where they like take the person into your body. You're like, I'm gonna just bring Jamie in right in this moment. I'm just gonna make the decision. I'm gonna practice being assertive. And every single time you flex that muscle, you get better at it. So, we can use Jamie and my evolving assertiveness, like try it on for size if you're someone that feels like you're at the beginning of where I was, which is like sometimes you're paralyzed.
Yeah. Love that, Sarah. Sarah, you mentioned a few, like you were talking about, seeking out therapists. Even some of these, I've done the School of Mom. I'm still in the School of Mom. Even some of these components that we're talking about, I do feel like, we're talking about like practicing these things. There is a mindfulness component to it. If people want to connect with you, learn more about your services, either at therapy or the School of Mom and the mindfulness piece, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so if you're in Mass or Rhode Island, please reach out to find a therapist. If you're in need, we have individual and couples. So you can reach out to or go to parentwellnessgroup.com. We also have group therapy as well. And if you are interested in mindfulness and self-compassion and being with a community of women that's really waking up and becoming more conscious and getting to know their bodies, that is the School of Mom. So MOM stands for Mothering Oneself Mindfully. So you can go to theschoolofmom.com. My signature program runs from October to May, and we have lots of other stuff going on. A group called Untethered for moms that have struggles with their mom or their mother-in-law. And we also have a free community. If you just go to motheringOneselfMindfully.com, you can jump in, and I actually will be doing monthly meditations to get to know these parts of yourself. Which of course you can take the quiz at theschoolofmom.com/quiz and start to play with like your internal dialogues and maybe potentially name them, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, my internal dialogue is Beth. For anybody who wants to do the quiz and find out their dominant voice, mine is Beth. Let me know if you're Beth.
We have a lot of Beths. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to hearing people's reactions.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Sarah, I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.